the Texans go to historic Lambeau Field and don't do exactly what we would like to see the Texans do. We're going to talk about that and more on this edition of The Bullpen.
To throw the punches away. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Touchdown for a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to The Bullpen, the number one Houston Texans podcast, in my opinion. I hope it is in your opinion. I'm here with, as usual, with my co-host, Tom Jabria. Tom, how are you doing today?
You know, I'm good. I know that there's some fans that aren't good. They hate the outcome of this game. But when you look at all the things that we're about to get into, I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm frustrated with it, but in a different way. Like early in the season, it was like I had to explain myself as like, well, I have a standard. This is a Super Bowl contender, but like this is a close loss to a good team. There's a lot of frustrating parts about it, but I think it's all stuff that can be fixed. Will it be fixed? That's going to be the discussion that needs to be had. So let's dive into our discussion about this game. The Texans lost 24-22, last second field goal. There was some people that said that with as many defensive injuries as the Texans had, that this would not be a close game and that they were going to be outgunned. And I think that's where we should probably start, is by discussing how the defensive injuries didn't really seem like a factor. And so when you look at it, the issue comes from the offensive side of the ball. So as we usually do, we'll start with the offensive side of the ball. CJ Stroud, not a great day. I don't think it's his fault that it wasn't a great day. And anyone who watched the game probably also doesn't think that. I think I know what your answer is, but let's just start with the question. What is the issue with the Texans offense in this game?
Well, I don't think you can look at this game objectively. Obviously, we have this unbelievable love for our stars, right? Our guys, they are infallible. And while I feel that way about my guys, I'm like you, I'm a fan too. I do believe CJ missed some throws today. And did that cost them the game? No, ultimately. But was it entirely the offensive line? I don't think so. I think the lion's share of it falls on the offensive line. I think when you look at it, they're just not allowing CJ. They're not affording him the time that he needs. They're daring Bobby Slowick to dial up some plays to beat them, either in the intermediate on quick stuff or deep, because they're just loading up the box. And I'll give credit to Bobby where it's due. I think he was able to scheme up the running game effectively. I mean, they ran the ball great, but when CJ needed to get him, 5, 6, 7 yards, there was just not a play that was ever called that you felt confident in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you to an extent, but I can trace back most of CJ's missteps throwing the ball to a lack of a clean pocket. Pass protection was practically non-existent today, and it got so bad. One of the things I'll give you on CJ's part, and it was called out by the commentators, is there was plays where the pocket, when it was clean, CJ abandoned it early because his internal clock had become so shortened by the lack of pass pro that he couldn't sense a clean pocket because it just didn't really ever happen. So, I mean, I'll call it to the offensive line. The way I'll do it is this, right? I like to do comparison, and the only other loss in the season is to fellow NFC North opponent, the Vikings. When I look at that game, the offensive line was also a huge reason why the Texans lost that game. But there's a difference. In the Vikings game, the Texans lost that game because of a lack of discipline. A lot of penalties. It wasn't a skill issue. We had a discussion on, is Laramie Tunsil worth his penalties? Because it seemed like it's not a skill issue. He's just not disciplined. In this game, you have Titus Howard tripping backwards over himself. You have offensive linemen not able to maintain blocks. And you ask yourself, is it all on the O-line? And in my opinion, it's a combination, right? There was some downright bad play from the offensive line that indicated somewhat of a skill issue, but I'll put it on this, and it's a feeling I've had developing. You know me, I've been someone who's been pretty quick to defend Bobby Slowick to this point. But I think the issue and what it is becoming is it could be on one end or the other. It could be a poor scheme fit on the offensive line. It could be poor scheme implementation by Bobby Slowick, but the scheme itself does not lend any help to the offensive personnel that are on the field. CJ Stroud is expected to make these long developing reads. The offensive linemen are not holding their blocks long enough, or the play is taking too long to develop, which is expected because that's what the play calls for. And that was been a problem for the past couple of weeks, but it's something that showed up this week where it felt like the scheme is just clunky. And a lot of people will chalk it up to Bobby Slowick's play calling. I don't think Bobby Slowick is a bad play caller. I just think that his scheme and his architecture of the plays does not really, because it's interesting. Slowick comes from a tree of offensive coordinators that are supposed to be a quarterback friendly scheme, right? It's meant to make things really easy. Running backs that were drafted in the 7th round or even undrafted are supposed to just be able to pick up the rock and run it. It's meant to be like a very go with the flow, like Kyle Shanahan type offense. And it's just not being that. So that's what I would chalk it up to. I don't know. Do you agree with that sentiment?
To an extent, the first thing I want to get really clear: Titus Howard steps on Dalton Schultz's foot, and
I didn't see that.
And
this
when
is
you
the second
look,
week in a row where I just didn't see something that happened.
and when you look, and at first glance, I saw it, and I'm like, oh well, Titus just eats it right there, and it's unabated. And then when they show the replay, you see him take a step back, and Dalton just was tucked in a little too tight, and he stepped on his boot as he's going out, and that's why he slipped. So while I want to be hypercritical of the offensive line because they're not doing enough to give CJ the time he needs to do what I think he needs to do, on that particular play, I don't know what Titus could have did because he stepped on the dude who took off. The thing that I thought was interesting that was brought up in a post game I was on earlier had to do with team stunting and them not being able to block that up. Stunts give the Texans fits, and I don't know if CJ is the guy that's supposed to determine where guys align based on what he's seeing. He's supposed to shift protections to help him with running backs and things of that nature, or tight ends on the end. But if that is a CJ thing, then I think that's where some of the fault may lie. I know Bobby can send the play in all he wants, but in the end, it's up to the offensive line and CJ to run it. So that's something I'm curious to. It would absolutely help kind of understand some of the deficiencies, whether or not this is something that needs to be at Bobby's feet, because no, he's responsible for shifting protections around and moving guys in order to get them where they need to block this thing up. Because right now you're getting guys just running free at the quarterback, probably 30, 40% of the time throughout a game, and it's just too much. You're going to have broken down plays. It happens. But at some point, there has to be, okay, we can't run this offense until we can block for it. And right now we can't block for it.
I'm glad you brought it up because I actually, surprisingly enough, had this conversation with my wife while watching the game. She said, hey, whose job is it to make sure that doesn't happen? Because it happened often enough. Like, she's watching every snap and she's like, and Mina Kimes, I think, tweeted that Next Gen Stats had the pressure rate at 50% of the snaps that CJ Stroud took. He was under pressure at one point in the game. And my wife said, whose job is it to make sure that the offensive lineman can actually block those players? Like what happens at the line of scrimmage, and why are they not picking up on the fact that there's unblocked people coming into the backfield? And I was like, I mean, my understanding is that there's a communication that needs to happen between the offensive lineman and CJ Stroud at the line of scrimmage to identify blitzes, identify, hey, that guy's going. There's that joking clip of Aaron Rodgers in practice where he's like, hey, I know you're not coming. That's a fake. So don't even bother. And he was right. And there's videos that break down why Aaron Rodgers was right and why a quarterback should see that. And so it brings up a communication piece. Is CJ not communicating with the offensive line? Is the offensive line not communicating with CJ? Because like you said, Bobby calls the plays, and Bobby has schemed in probably protections that account for all of this. And so is it so out there? Is it not being communicated to the players on the field how they're supposed to communicate that? There's layers to this. This is like ogres, like onions, all the Shrek stuff. There's layers to it. There's a number of different things that could be at fault, but we don't know. We're watchers. We just enjoy watching the Texans, right, Tom? That's you and me, just fans of the game, just really like talking about it. But I'd be really interested to see who I don't want to say is at fault. In my experience in a workplace environment, generally, you're not trying to pin the blame on anyone. You're just trying to fix the problem. So what is the root cause? Is the offensive line not communicating? Is CJ not communicating? is Bobby Slowick just calling such trash plays schematically that it's not possible to scheme for that? Because, like, all jokes aside, with Titus Howard stepping on Dalton Schultz's foot, like, there was a lot of plays where it felt like stunts or anything got an unblocked man rushing CJ most of his snaps. He threw the ball 21 times, which I think is pretty low, and didn't even complete half of his passes. And that's because on over half of his plays, he had unblocked personnel attacking him, and he couldn't account for how many people were not being blocked. The protection was not there. So I don't think it's as cut and dry as ship off the offensive line, trade them all, and get new people. Right? It's not a skill issue. I think it's mostly schematic. But even when you narrow down the problem to schematical, like, it could be at a number of levels that this is an issue. So I'm wondering how they address it in practice, right? That's my thing. I need to then, and that's what's going to determine if Bobby Slowick can keep his job, honestly. And I don't think it's premature to have that discussion, as much as Bobby Slowick was a guy who's being recruited for head coaching jobs, right? But it really does fall on him and D'Amico to sort out what the problem is there. I'm also glad you brought up Dalton Schultz, though, because early on it felt like Dalton Schultz was having a redemption game. He had 2 really good catches. And then he trips up Titus Howard, which I just recently found out about. And then literally is he let one of the free rushers, he had a bad read and stepped in instead of out. And that allowed a free edge rusher to get to CJ on a play. Just another up and down game for Dalton Schultz. What do you make of it? I didn't think it was bad. I don't think it was like, redemption game status, but like, I didn't feel like he had a bad game outside of 1 or 2 plays. But what are your thoughts on him?
I feel like with Dalton Schultz, I think that if he's going to be in a play to block, then Bobby has messed up. That's a mistake. There are better blocker. There are better guys that you can bring in as the tight end position. And this is nothing to Dalton Schultz. I'm just saying, if that is what you are asking of him, even for one play, then you need to bring him off the field. You need to put TQ in, Stover, Brevin if he's healthy. You need one of those 3 guys who are all better blockers than Dalton Schultz. That is not to say that I don't think Dalton Schultz isn't important or a good football player or a part of this team. I really feel like today would have been a great day to see how much of Dalton they could have utilized and schemed up plays for him across the middle of the field where I thought Green Bay was soft. And it just never materialized. It would have been, something that I think would have been quick hitter-ish to where, okay, if I've got heat coming from one side, I can catch him on a crossing route from the other side and then still be able to do everything else schematically. That play that it looked like he was in to block, I think that's a mistake by Bobby Slowick. Like, he just doesn't want to be that tight end. He just doesn't. And I don't know if he would admit to that, but his body language says 100%. I don't want to be on the field if you're asking me to block. And it's just because he knows he's not good at it.
Yeah, I recently have conducted a bunch of job interviews. And I feel like that's a classic case of, like, you can't tell your future employer, or your current employer for that matter, that you don't want to do what is considered a very important part of your job. But it just doesn't seem like it's something that Dalton Schultz wants to do, right? And to that point, this brings up another tie. If we're comparing Texans losses, in the Vikings game, one of the bigger issues outside of discipline was schematically the tight ends were being asked to block Jonathan Grenard, and the Vikings edge rushers were being blocked solely by tight ends on a lot of plays, and that is an issue that player skill level can't overcome. You can't, like, what are the players supposed to do when you've schematically said, hey, Dalton, Jonathan Grenard, that guy that just got paid several $1 million to be one of the better defensive ends in the league? Yeah, and you played in practice with him last year, right? Yeah, we want you to be the one who blocks him, not our left tackle who's making about as much as him. No, so that is a parallel of another thing. And I think that we'll find that throughout when we talk through this. For the most part, like, a lot of the things that cost the Texans this game are things that, on a larger scale, obviously I alluded to it before this game, right? This game was never going to be like the Vikings game. There was nothing that was setting the Texans up to get mollywalloped by this team. This was always going to be a close game. We both agreed it was going to come down to who had the ball last. That's how it played out. So with that in mind, a couple more topics to talk about. Tank Dell. Tank Dell had 0 catches. He had one really close to a touchdown, and at this point, we can say that a touchdown on any of those drives that resulted in a field goal probably would have been the difference in this game. What do you make of Tank Dell's performance today?
I think when you really critical about one particular play, and I've seen it already a lot, that first touchdown, Tank has to make this catch. Tank has to make this catch.
I mean, people don't catch every ball, but
he's got 2 hands on the ball. He's got to make that catch. And I'm like, the dude had to go to the ground to get it. It was a tough play. I understand not being able to make that catch. Well, he made the catch the week prior. I was like, well, then let's give credit for making the catch the week prior. I really feel like right now Tank is in a weird limbo area within the offense. I think he's like the 3rd or 4th read for CJ Stroud. And when you think about that, think about the last couple of games where CJ hasn't had the time to get to the 3rd or 4th read. And then if he does, he's under incredible duress. It's the last guy. Maybe he's flushed to that side and he's like pitching it to him on the run. And it's like, you only get 3 or 4 of those a game, and people expect you to have good games and go, well, why haven't I seen Tank's name called? Well, look at the way they're using him. He's not the focal point of this offense. I do believe that right now it's Steph Diggs intermediately, and it's run the rock. When Nico comes back, I think it goes back to status quo with him being the alpha and then so on and so forth. And for people, I think that's hard. I think the Tank is getting an unfair shake. Do I think some of this? Yeah, could he make every catch? Absolutely. Does anyone make every catch? No. So he got 4 targets today. I don't think any of them were good ones where, it was like, hey, I'm right here, throw me the ball, and he's not under duress or the quarterback's not under duress and having to extend or anything like that. Obviously, you take that one and the last offensive play for the Texans away, he had 2 targets. So that's not a lot.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people myself included, had high expectations of CJ's ability to distribute the ball to a lot of talent. And I think one of the things that helped Tank Dell out last year was that CJ was in his first year in the league and was trying to find his guy, and he landed on Tank Dell. So the Texans offense made that happen, and now he's kind of landed on Nico Collins. And I mean, once again, we can circle back to the topic of scheme. The Texans have not exactly made it a point to scheme around getting the ball to Tank Dell like they did last year before he got injured. And so now Tank is just kind of in this weird limbo. Like you said, when you're the 3rd read in an offense that literally can't pass protect, you're not going to see a lot of targets. So I think that, at the end of the day, it is disappointing to see that this receiving core that's touted as so talented and is very talented is falling apart at the loss of one player. Because I think that, like I said, myself included, a lot of people thought that the addition of Stephon Diggs was meant as insurance for a situation like this where a Nico Collins or Tank Dell goes down, but we're not getting the production from Tank Dell in that event. We haven't really seen a whole lot of production from Tank Dell. And another thing to consider is that Tank Dell literally was shot this past offseason. He's literally coming off of an injury that is very serious. Like, I don't like to make this comparison. I don't make it lightly, but John Mechie had cancer and went through a similar, lower body injury and had a really long recovery period and never quite got back to himself. And so, Tank obviously was really quick to get back to work and is a part of this offense. I think it's more lies in the scheming, but we also have to consider that maybe Tank Dell is still working back. He could be working through some things mentally. I would have some major PTSD flashes if I had been at a pool party and been shot at and literally was hit by a bullet from a gun. I don't know. I would be pretty mentally traumatized by that, and I'd probably try and sweep it under the rug publicly, and I probably wouldn't really talk about it, but that's another thing to consider. So looking at the offense as a whole, there's really only one more thing to talk about. We kind of alluded to it earlier, which is the clock management at the end of the game. We briefly talked about this before, and I'm interested to have this discussion right now with the listeners listening. I don't like the call. I don't like indecisiveness is exactly how you just literally. Growing up, when I learned to drive, my mom always told me, if you're indecisive behind the wheel of a car, you're going to kill somebody, right? And all that Bobby Slowick did by being indecisive in this situation was kill the hopes and dreams of a bunch of Texans fans in terms of getting this win in Lambeau. But you either run the ball 3 times or you pass the ball 3 times and try and get the touchdown. That's my thought on it. I would love to hear your thoughts on how the Texans managed the clock at the end of the game.
I don't necessarily disagree with what Bobby Sloak did. I understand all the different aspects. I understand your side of it. I understand the people that say, you need to run the rock 3 times. I understand the people that say, yo, just go throw it. What I would say is this. I think he was playing the hand he was dealt. At the time, like, Joe Mixon was the entire offense. Like, they could not block anyone long enough to give CJ a chance to really find somebody, and that was a problem. Bobby Sloak's trying to drop something that A, could potentially get him in the end zone, B, eat the clock, which I agree with, and C, use what he's given. If he would have dropped back and thrown 3 times and left all this time on the clock, and they score a field goal, and it lets Green Bay get even closer than they did, I think people would be hypercritical because they didn't eat up enough clock. It's one of those, I truly believe that unless they scored a touchdown or unless they won the football game, Bobby Sloak was going to be damned if he did and damned if he didn't. Because it did not matter how it ended. As long as they didn't win, this is where we could go back and go, Bobby, you should have went for 6. Bobby, you should have ate more clock. You should have done something to change the outcome. And I mean, I hate to say I told you so, because I don't ever want to say this, but I truly thought the team with the team that had the ball last was going to win this game.
We both agreed on that. We both agreed on that. I could go in on, right, like, there's a lot of hypotheticals, but obviously if you believe in butterfly effect, or if you just understand that the flow of the game is different when things happen different, I could speak to the fact that when you run the ball the 3rd time, you take away that last timeout. If the game continues and proceeds as it happened, and the Packers don't have that timeout, when there's that questionable catch, was it a catch or a drop? The Packers had a timeout, and they delayed calling it by several seconds because they were like, wait, was this? And they almost let the clock run out on that situation. Now, if the Packers didn't have any timeouts, the whole Packers offense is rushing to the line of scrimmage to clock it. So that's not realistic. I'm not going to talk about that. I don't think that changes based off of this. But what I will say is this. I think, here, I'll let you get in your point. I don't want you to forget about it.
Well, a key point there, the play before that, or 2 points before that, they ran off like a minute. Like, once they got into field goal range, they started killing clock themselves because they didn't want the Texans to come back and do anything. And
exactly.
maybe, and again, it all depends on how much you trust your defense. DeMeco Ryans clearly trusts his defense, but maybe he should have called his 3 timeouts to try to leave some time for CJ.
Yeah, and so my problem with the whole thing is you either trust your defense all the way, or you believe that you need CJ to be on the field last, which personally, as good as the defense was, right, and we'll get into the defense in a minute, as good as it was, I personally would rather have CJ on the field last. And if you believe that, then you start throwing the ball at that point, and then you leave, a minute or so. The Packers obviously are going to try and run the clock, but if you aggressively approach the end zone and they have all 3 of their timeouts and you have all 3 of yours, you can manage the clock from your end and get the ball back when they kick a field goal, if they do, right? On the other hand, and what I think they should have committed to doing based off of how they approached it was literally just run the ball one more time, take away the Packers' timeout, and then the flow of that last drive goes entirely different because the Packers were nonchalant. They could just let the clock run and do whatever they wanted instead of having this sense of urgency that sometimes leads to mistakes. But, I mean, obviously both of us are not coaches. However we would have run this, hindsight's 2020. I mean, I'm not going to get too caught up on that. And like I said at the beginning of the show, I mean, I don't think that this is a loss that's that frustrating from the perspective of there's other wins, in my opinion, that were more frustrating than this one. This was against a really good Packers team, the Texans. offense didn't show up, and that's something we can talk about and fix. But I'm not like as good as the closest the game was. I'm not like super frustrated with it. But looking at the defensive side of the ball, this is the side of the ball that everyone said, oh, the Texans are definitely going to be lacking on defense because they have 5 starters out. If they're including Mario Edwards, who went down with a suspension. But at the end of the day, the defense showed up, and aside from maybe a couple boneheaded plays, or you could nitpick a few things, they really did play well. I'll go through the nitpicks, right? Neville Hewitt, if he just keeps running, takes that interception in for a touchdown, 4 extra points, changes the flow of the game. You could go back and you could look at that suplex that Neville Hewitt did. A lot of it circles around Neville Hewitt, but I think that Neville Hewitt's level of intensity in play, it kind of made up for the lack of having Aziz Al-Shaair there, and it helped the defense play to a level that they needed to keep this game within reach. I don't know. How did you feel about the defense in general?
I don't know what you saw that made you think Neville Hewitt wasn't running. I think he was absolutely gassed.
He stopped to try and cut back, and I think he outruns the quarterback if he just keeps going.
Now, I agree with you there, but at that point in time, I think he was on empty. Like that's one of those like,
oh yeah,
you're not made to run 50 some odd yards or whatever he was running, and yeah, the cutback was like, well, I don't want him to push me out of bounds. If I cut back across his face, then maybe he doesn't stop me. Regardless, I just want the football. Like at that point, I think you did your job. All the yak after that, thank you so very much for your hard work and effort. We got the ball. Let's go score. The suplex thing, man, I've seen a lot of people just go in on the suplex thing, and I understand it. But as ratcheted up as this game was, with Steph Diggs fighting guys before the game, and all the chippiness and talking and chirping and pushing and shoving, if you told me he suplexed the guy, I would be like, all right, whatever. And I know
I thought it was a weak flag. I thought I was like, I don't know. I didn't think anything went like, I don't know. He's had worse hits in his special teams career, personally.
And it's one of those things. If they blow the whistle, then maybe that doesn't happen. But you're taught to play to the whistle. Dude's trying to run this way. You're trying to pull him back the other way. He lets go. Now he's suplexed. You know,
now it's a skill issue on the refs. You know, that's what it is.
100%. So other than that, I thought Neville Hewitt played phenomenally. Had a tip drill that saved a completion in the middle of the game somewhere where he was back in coverage and he just did just enough. And I think it was late in the game. It was almost the interception that kind of iced it. Yeah. So Neville Hewitt played great, man. And I know we've been very critical, and we're like, oh boy, Neville Hewitt's the guy that they're going to have to turn to. I don't like the sound of that, but Neville Hewitt played fine for me. Obviously, you don't want the penalty. Obviously, you'd love him to get in for 6, but everything else looks so good. Jake Hansen too. Gotta give him shine too. I thought both linebackers, for what they were asked to do, so great. Ross, on the other hand, that's the one guy that I thought was barbecue chicken so much. And some people
him
are like,
and Eric Murray were just, ugh.
And Murray, like, he made a couple plays too. So you kind of live with that. Jalen
Murray's
Petrie
the kind of player
plays.
who like will step up and make the most excellent play, like the interception last week, and then the whole rest of the game is just like, dude, why are you on this team?
But I mean, overall, I thought the defense was fine. I really do. I really, if you told me they were going to give up 24 points with all of these injuries, I'd have probably said, nah, there ain't no way.
Exactly. You know. No, yeah, the defense played excellently, and that's why this next sentence, Tom, I told you this before the show, is probably going to rub people the wrong way because it's going to come across, and I need everyone to know that I think the defense did great before I say this, so to contextualize what I'm about to say. The Packers gift wrapped this game for the Texans. I said it in a tweet, and I love this phrasing of it. The Packers grabbed the Texans by the collar and begged them. They implored them, please take this game. Please be competitive. We're really trying to give this to you. Two Jordan Love interceptions, just turnover city in Green Bay. They just couldn't hang on to the ball. The muff punt, everything to set up the Texans to be in this game. And I told Tom this too. I think that this feeds into. I've been frustrated in the past with the Texans playing trash football and coming away with wins. the more frustrating. Like this game in particular is an example of just get the win however you can. Like as long as the Texans win this game, we'll have these discussions, but they go down different if they come away with the win. And so the Packers gave the Texans every opportunity to come away with this win, and they just like they were like, nah, no, thank you. I don't want to do that. And it comes across like that, right? I think that the Packers, what they did was, and we've talked about the atrophy of defenses throughout the game and how a lack of offensive play generally, the defense can only hold for so long. The Packers kind of prolonged that atrophy of the defense by how badly they played, and they gave the defense an opportunity to actually show up in the second half and play really good football, all things considered, I think. But Tom thinks that I'm coming across like I'm disrespecting the effort this defense gave. I think the defense did great. I think they got some help from the Packers. That's all I'm going to say to that.
I can't tell you how much I disagree with this statement. It's absolutely horrible. I think this is the thing that people say that just frustrates people so much because it's basically saying the Packers were bad, not that the Texans defense was good. And I can't get with
the
that.
defense. It's a two-way street. The defense has to pick the ball off. The defense applied pressure to Jordan Love, right? And we talked about that. The pass rush got there. I wouldn't say super consistently, but the pass rush did enough to make these plays happen, and the defense took advantage of it. Like that's what I'm saying is that like the Packers didn't play their best ball. They didn't show up in the best way, and there was things the Texans defense did that fed that. But at the end of the day, like in my opinion, watching the flow of the game, what the Packers did was they adjusted throughout the game, right? They played some of their worst football at the front end of the game, and then they decided to show up late. Now the Texans do that the opposite way every week, where they play a really great first half, and then they like go, oh shoot, the other team's adjusted. What should we do? Oh, I guess we'll just play ball and see how it happens. And so that to me is an overarching theme of the game is that Matt LaFleur said, I'm going to go to the film room, I'm going to study this team, and I'm going to watch the game while I'm coaching it. And then when things happen and I see things, I'm going to make adjustments so that my team can win the game. And D'Amico said, line them up and let them play ball. And Bobby said, this is really complicated. I hope you guys can do this. And that put together just didn't really put a good product on the field for the Texans.
If this was like a Packers podcast and they said the Texans gift drafted this win to the Packers because their offense played like trash,
I would agree with it. The Texans.
No one would agree with you.
No, the Texans. The Texans. What they did was they took the gift the Packers gave them, and the defense rolled with it. The defense was like that kid that was raised to think like, oh, you can't say no, thank you. You have to take the gift. Like you have to do it. And the defense put in the requisite effort to make the best of it. They said, oh, a coloring book. I'm not 3, but I guess I'll color some of the pages. And then the offense said, oh, a coloring book. I'm going to throw this in the trash and then give it back to you gift wrapped with you gave me the gift receipt. I'm sending it back to Ross and then you can buy it again at a discount because it's open box. Like that's what the Texans offense did. They saw that some of the pages were colored on and they said, I think we can still return this. And then they sent it back to the Packers. That's what happened.
The two Packers fans that I ran into in a post game after the game were very not James Roy. They were like, hey, that's a really good football team. Y'all played a really good game. A lot of respect. It was not appreciate y'all hooking us up with this free win. Thank you.
Like I said, it's not a free win. I feel like the gift wrap analogy is getting into this thing like it was free. There was a hot potato element to it where it felt like both teams kind of fed into this, let's keep this competitive thing, in my opinion. I did think it was a competitive game, but I felt like, here's my thought, right? If the Texans offense literally just plays mediocre ball, like not below average, like some basic pass protection that gives CJ enough time to throw a similar stat line to Jordan Love, this is the Texans game. It is. So it's not gift wrapped. It's just the Texans didn't show up on offense.
So we're going to say that the Green Bay Packers defense did nothing?
We're going to say that Packers defense. Okay. I see what you're saying. Every time I talk, I feel like I put my foot in my mouth and I have to go back and explain myself. I obviously understand. Like I literally just said that Matt LaFleur decided he was going to watch the game and do in-game adjustments. And as a team, the Packers every time that like the Texans came out the first drive, a couple drives and had some good plays, and the Packers defense said, "Oh, we're not letting that happen again." Like, "Oh, is your name not Joe Mixon? Yeah, you're not going anywhere. We're not letting you anywhere near the end zone." And the Texans did not make adjustments. That is in my opinion, the way the Texans gift wrapped the game was by literally not adjusting to what the Packers were doing. The Packers obviously played a really good game of football. They made adjustments. They played at a high level on both sides of the ball in spite of the mistakes that were made early on by their offense, and it showed. So, I mean, I kudos to the Packers. The use of free and gift wrapped is my way of hyperbole and really just being frustrated that the Texans lost. But at the end of the day, the Packers played a really good game, and the Texans just didn't really do that on the offensive side of the ball, in my opinion.
I will say this. The adjustment part that you're speaking to, I totally agree. I think that when the Texans show up, they're immensely talented, and the talent can get them very, very far. Now, to get to that next level that we feel they can be, they have to be able to go, okay, what is this other team doing to me, and how do I get out of that? You know, the good teams do that. The good teams, for a half, you'll have them confused. You know, we saw it with Baltimore in the playoffs last year. Texans had Baltimore, you know, they were in a dogfight at halftime. And then Baltimore said, hey, we got to make some adjustments. We got to change some stuff. That came out second half. We're a different team. I don't know that the Texans are there yet. I'm perfectly okay with that. But you know that, and in my opinion, every team that plays them knows that whether they make adjustments or not, I'm in for a full football game. I have to go and take it from the Texans because they're talented. And for me, that's where I'm okay with the learning pains. Second year head coach, second year quarterback, second year offensive coordinator. If these are the growing pains, then so be it. Now, I get it. James and thousands like him, expectations are high, baby. You've teased me. You've shown me the light, and I see it, and I want to embrace it. You just got to be patient.
And that's why I love having you as my co-host, Tom, because when I get impatient, you remind me that patience is a virtue and that Rome wasn't built in a day. And you start throwing a bunch of cliches at me, and I go, oh, yeah, that's right. I should probably be patient. And to that, I'll agree with you. I think that later in the season, there's some matchups like the Lions game, like the Ravens and the Chiefs, that I think will be very telling as to where this Texans team is at. There was some people on Twitter that were comparing today's game to the playoff game against the Ravens. I don't think it was quite to that same extent because, one, the Ravens eventually took off and left us in the dust. So obviously there was some level of talent increase on the Texans side to be able to keep this game close in spite of the injuries that they were suffering from. But I do think that as a young team, the big thing, and with a young head coach and a young offensive coordinator, the big thing is going to be figuring out how to make adjustments. And I don't think the Texans have quite figured that out. Sometimes talent overcomes it, and this time it didn't. So and as I said, I know it sounds, I'm frustrated because the Texans lost, but this is not the most frustrating game the Texans have played. I think there's definitely wins the Texans have gotten this year that were more frustrating than this one, than this loss, I should say. But yeah, overall, I mean, I don't know. I'm ready to put it in the trash, forget about it, and get on to a Victory Monday at some point. Probably next week. We'll see. But yeah, Tom, any final thoughts before we bring this thing to a close?
I know today sucked. I know you hate to lose those good close ones where you feel like, you know, your team is enough to win it. You get that late lead and you want to. I mean, but how many of those games have the Texans taken from other teams in the last 2 seasons and we're like, wow, you know, that's my football team. So eventually they're going to have to give one of those up. They gave one of those up today to a good team. Credit to Green Bay. I want to give credit to Green Bay. They won a game they didn't need to win, but it was a good building block for them. You got people talking potential Super Bowl matchup or rematch, whatever. And I think that's awesome. Anytime that you get people coming away from games talking about this could be a Super Bowl matchup, that speaks so highly of your team. because they think of you enough to go, oh, well, I could see them all the way at the end playing this other team. And that's saying something considering who else is out there that they could face. So I'm still incredibly hyped for what's to come. You know, you got Joe Mixon on social media is like, hey, once we get right, once we get some guys back, we'll be good. Tough loss, but you know, we'll learn from it and go on. And that's what you want to hear. He did everything he possibly could. He could have easily been like, well, I got mine and we'll figure it out. He did not do that. He did not do that. He said, guys, we're going to get right. You had Steph Diggs come in and go, hey, CJ was under duress. I mean, you saw some post-game stuff from these guys that go, look, cool, be cool, people. It sucked, but we're gonna figure it out. And then when we get on our roll, here we come. Nobody's gonna want to see us. And I agree.
100%. I mean, my silver lining is this: they showed a stat this season. The Texans, to this point, are including this game 4-1 in one-score games. So good football teams win the close ones, and that record is something to be proud of, and something that you should be tracking throughout the season to see how the Texans perform. Because a lot of times when you're matched up with another good team, it should be a close game. You just should be the one that wins it typically. So that's all I'll say about that. This has been the Bullpen. Thanks for tuning in. If you're watching, you can listen, and if you're listening, you can watch. Just search The Bullpen, a Houston Texans podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube, and you will find us. If you want to find The Bullpen on social media, it's at The Bullpen Cast. More active on Instagram than Twitter. Really just active on Instagram and not on Twitter, so I'd save your follow for Instagram. I am at N1 Texans fan on Instagram and at James Roy NFL on Twitter. Tom is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter and at TC Tom1 on Instagram. Speaking of Instagram, on my page, we'll be having a Texans ticket giveaway for the Colts game, sponsored by Centurion Roofing. Make sure you're following them so that you can be entered. The post goes out, I guess it would be today technically, since that's going to be Monday when the post goes up. If you want to get early advance notice on giveaways that I'm doing with Texans gear and such, and you're interested in dropping $1 a month on that, I have a subscription on my Instagram page at M1 Texans fan, and we're giving away a jersey this month. So get in, make sure that your name can be drawn for that. And as always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.
Take the handoff. Stroud looking. Stroud.